All right. I'm gonna try to be kind of delicate with the topic of today's video because it's kind of a challenging subject to talk about, and I want to do so through the lens of a little bit more of the kind of popular artists of the last 2 or 3 decades. Has it been that long? If I go about 30 years, is what, 80? Yeah, maybe. 90s, so 20 years. And what it is the decline of evangelicalism in America, which is, I don't want to be one of those alarmist types, like the sky is falling churchgoers that think the world is collapsing because of the fact that there are atheists that in Congress or something. Like, I'm not one of those people. Definitely not. If you know me, you know that's true. But I think there's something to be known. There's something to be had about the fact that, quite honestly, our culture does not have kind of a general respect for evangelical ideas in the marketplace the way it used to. Things like kind of a Judeo-Christian morality center or things like that, because in a lot of respects, kind of Christians have done it to themselves, kind of seeding the ground with a hostility against the new popular ideas that are out there. And so as a result, they're reaping this kind of politically mobilized hostility against them that they are not really equipped to fight on the same terms, I guess you could say. Especially if you're going to do so from a Christian worldview where Jesus says to pray for the person who's persecuting and to love the one who's hating you. There's not really a way for Christians to go to battle, I guess, against these ideas and really kind of win in the public sphere against them, to defeat them, more or less. And you can see that with, Roe v. Wade was in 1973, I believe it is. We're talking about 40 years ago, 45 years ago, maybe. And then you got, just the proliferation of things like Planned Parenthood or whatever. Anyways, that's not really what I want to talk about, though. I want to talk about this in the lens of a case study involving 3 artists. The first being Marilyn Manson. Second, Katy Perry. And third, Brendan Urie. Because these 3, it's very publicly known that they grew up in Christian conservative households. Marilyn Manson, well, it's hard to believe anything about Marilyn Manson because some of the rumors that circulated about him. Supposedly he's like this pastor's kid growing up. Now he's basically the poster child that Christians like to cite of kind of Satanism in music and in culture. And honestly, just a freak in general. The guy's just weird. And then Katy Perry, who her dad is a pastor and elder and deacon. There's videos out there of her singing Southern gospel music and hymns and all that kind of stuff that small kind of church kids with musical talents tend to do. And now, couldn't be any further from that. This was never the way I planned, not my poster child, I guess, for women rebelling from their religious upbringings. It felt so wrong, it felt so right, don't mean I'm in love tonight. And then there's of course other artists that can be used in this instance to represent this. Brian Head Welch famously coming back to faith after like giving his life to Christ at a VBS, like this typical kind of whatever story, kid signs the card at VBS so he can get the cookie or the whatever so he can go to heaven, and then never living really it out at all. Or I think the bass player from Edema and other, like, there's plenty of them out there. But then the third is this guy named Brendan Urie, which I don't hate Brendan Urie. Like, I don't know why I even feel the need to say that, but I don't hate Brendan Urie. I think he's actually one of the more creative artists that's currently, like, I write songs that don't rhyme using repetition and illusion and other kind of poetic literary tools to, like, it's in a lot of ways innovative, and I use very fascinating, colorful analogies. This is gospel for the fallen ones, locked away in permanent slumber. To describe what a lot of musicians talk about, relationships, breakups, things like that, challenges of peer pressure and whatever. Like, he really does a lot of cool creative things. And honestly, like, the only reason I'm even aware of him on it, because this is not my music sphere. Marilyn Manson's probably the closest, just in junior high and high school. He was popular, like really popular back then among the kind of kid that I was. But even he's not really that for me. Like, I always thought he was just kind of a gimmick, a hack. I'm a little bit, most of the music choices that I have are 20 or 30 years old. I don't listen to a lot of current popular music in any sphere. I just don't. But I got introduced to Panic at the Disco because my wife has a fan crush on Brendan Urie. Literally, like, as I'm doing some of the research and kind of like getting a feel for his music and kind of the person that he is, watching interviews and things like that, I'm in the kitchen at the table with my iPad open, just kind of going through 2 or 3 different ones, and all of a sudden my wife comes in and just, hey, what are you doing? And just head over shoulder, like, watching what I like, because she's a fangirl for Panic at the Disco. So that's how I was introduced to him. But then I started learning a little bit more behind the scenes, and he's a fascinating character. I mean, most famous people are, but what these 3 individually, they kind of represent is that you have kids that grew up very strict, conservative, religious households. Now, Brendan Urie is obviously in a category of his own because he grew up as a Mormon, not as a Christian. And now secularists don't understand the distinction there, but I do, and so I wanted to make it clear that I'm not lumping in Mormons with Christians. I'm not doing that because that's heresy. What I am saying is that you have this strict religious household full of like heavy rules, a lot of regulation of behavior externally. And then as soon as these kids get out from underneath that umbrella, they just start going crazy, essentially. It's something that from a youth pastor's background, which is what I kind of have, it's something that's been a question asked over and over and over again in youth ministry conferences and leadership meetings and deacon meetings and stuff like this, is that kids will grow up through children's ministry, going to VBS, going to children's church on Sunday morning, and in Sunday school every week can recite Bible verses and church doctrine statements and stuff like that. And then they get up to high school, and then the youth minister will give them the daily promise guide for students as they're going off to college. And since they've been like accepted to wherever it is, UC Berkeley. Since I'm originally a California boy, Berkeley, Irvine, Chico State, like whatever school they ended up wanting to go to, Stan State, and then within 1 year, they've taken up alcohol. They're out all night partying. They've totaled their car on the side of the road because of intoxication or wild driving or just being irresponsible, cutting class and stuff like that. Which, I mean, every college student has missed a class once or twice just because they wanted to stay in bed. So I'm not even going to fault them on that. College is hard. But it's different, though, when we're talking about like just complete rejection. A lot of them even saying that I'm not a Christian anymore. They haven't been to church since they even enrolled, and that they've been persuaded by their atheist philosophy professor, their atheist ancient literature professor, into becoming agnostic or atheist as well. So the question becomes, for church leaders, if you're watching this, you're probably a Christian, or at least, I don't know why YouTube would have directed you to this video. Maybe, I don't know, but you're asking yourself the question of, like, how do we solve this problem? Or, on the other side, if you're not a Christian, you're watching this video, like, well, what's the problem here? They're making an elective choice of their own. They're making a decision about what they want to do as an adult now that they're outside the religious oppression of their upbringing and stuff like that, and that it's proof that Christianity doesn't really work as a whole, because otherwise, like, it would work. It would, like, people would stick with it, because in the same way that people follow scientism from the hypothesis to experiment to observation to conclusion. Like, it's just, here we have the evidence of that. You have somebody that was immersed in religious culture from birth and then rejected it as an adult because now they're smart enough and mature enough to realize how fake it is. And quite honestly, in a small way, they're not wrong. And what I mean by that is that you have kids that grew up not as Christians, but just religious. And the thing about it is that Christianity is not about making religious children, but it's about making Christian disciples. And over the last probably 2 decades, churches just have not put those two positions in their place. Like, fact is, when Christ was on the earth, one of the main things that he talked about all the time was this conflict between people who appeared religious, but inside, in their heart, were completely far from God. They didn't want anything to do with God, really. They just wanted the rules. They just wanted to do a checklist to make themselves feel good. In the Sermon on the Mount, he says, don't be like the hypocrites who stand in the courts to pray, or that give their gifts and charity in public and do all these things, because it's a good idea to give and to pray in public, but they're doing so just to have people turn and watch them do it, to have that moment of everybody's eyes are on me. And Jesus says in both instances, like, that they've already received the only reward that they will receive for that. That momentary gaze. But that's become the goal, that church ministries oriented towards adolescents have been about fostering religious behavior so that kids know when to pray over their food, what kind of words to say, how many Father Gods to put in their prayers. They know Hail Mary. They know how to pray their rosary. They just stuff like that. They have a purity ring on. They've been to True Love Waits conference, or they went to summer camp, or they whatever. Like, there's so many different things that criteria. They don't smoke, drink in high school, or at the very least, they don't get caught smoking, drinking, getting high, having sex while they're in high school. They don't get caught doing it. And that's kind of the key, of that when you raise a religious child rather than a Christian disciple, what you're doing is you're actually mentoring a small lawyer that reads the letter of the law and says, well, I wasn't out past curfew. I got in at 11 p.m. exactly, but that whole night they were out smoking and drinking and having sex and whatever it is, but they were home by curfew, so you can't be mad at me. They kept the one rule, but they broke all these other obvious, maybe unwritten rules, because parents don't talk to their kids about these things anymore. And they, like, missing the point. Like, the purpose for having a curfew, of having kids come home early at night, not being out all night, is to prevent them from getting involved with those kind of behaviors, right? Right? They're not considering the reasoning, the spirit, the intention behind the rule. They're just trying to observe the rule. So, I guess, like, what's the road look like from here? Where are we now, I guess, is the question. And what I would say is this. The Bible says that when you practice the spirit behind his law as much as the actual commandments thereof, something that happens is that the world outside peers in and they see how wise those things are, and they'll want to join the covenant. That was the purpose of the Old Testament law. That's the purpose of the New Testament commandments as well, that we're supposed to act as priests to the nations, that as Christians we're supposed to demonstrate the wisdom of God through obedience to the commandments of God. And so what's been placed into our laps now, with the hostility towards Christian ideals, is this amazing opportunity in the hands of children's ministers, youth ministers, family coaches and pastors and senior ministers everywhere across this country, has been placed an opportunity to demonstrate the wisdom of God's order for families, with men leading, and the mutual submission of marriage, and fathers not frustrating or exasperating their children, and children obeying their parents for this is right. Like, the wisdom behind those things, not just simply that it's a good idea because it is, but the reason why it's a good idea. Because the fact is, out in the world, things like fatherhood is seen as optional. Parenthood is an inconvenience, not a blessing. And community is a frustration for people who are pretending to be introverts on the internet and trying to avoid social interactions. See, we have this opportunity to demonstrate how wise it is to be in community with one another, family to family, person to person, connecting with one another, being vulnerable with our emotions, getting past just the, man, that guy seemed like knows the right words to pray, to knowing each other on Tuesday nights and on Wednesday nights rather than simply on Sunday mornings. knowing the struggles that go on behind closed doors, not trying to hide behind the suit and tie facade that people create for themselves, to try and appear holier than thou, giving the charity and the praying out in public that the Pharisees used to do, not giving in to that fakeness. But it's been created an opportunity to demonstrate the wisdom of those things. That as Christians give charitably into their church, that storehouse then has the ability to flow those funds and that time and the opportunity to serve into its local community, feeding the hungry, clothing the poor, and taking care of the widows and orphans that are being ground up and chewed up by the outside world. It should be the goal of every Christian, genuinely Christian church, that in our community, the local government won't need to spend any money in this 5 square block radius because we'll have already handled it. That when people are in need of a budget shortfall, when they're in need of food or clothing, they don't go to a government bureaucrat. They go to our front door. They come in and they know that we are not only more than happy to help them, but we're not going to attach ridiculous strings onto it either. We're not going to make them sign a fake card that doesn't mean anything either temporarily or eternally anyways. That we give generously and we give happily. We give freely. And that as they see that, which is such a demonstrably and dynamically distinct environment from what they're used to, they'll want to learn more. Not that it's a bait and switch, not that it's the bait, like to try and cover up the hook, but simply that it's because that's the way we're supposed to be. Like, it's the reason that idea is so attractive when it is genuine and not fake or begrudging, is that because we as a human being, we're so wounded in ourselves that we can see like that's the way it should be. I would I guess implore is the word, I don't know. I would beg any church leader that watches this video not to squander that opportunity, but that we're preaching the gospel, loving the gospel enough to let it flow out through both physical service actions, monetary giving charitably, and being free with words to build up the environment around you. Instead of just saying things about it that like, oh, this whole thing's going to hell in a handbasket or whatever, trying to hunker down, holy huddle, let's just try to survive the shelling, because if that's what you do, you won't. Because the thing is, if the church isn't giving outwardly, there's a genuine question that needs to be asked of that: is it a church at all? And I think that's one of the primary reasons why these people desert churches once they get up into adulthood, is that they begin to see with adult eyes how fake it really is. Because I grew up in church, and I could see, even as a kid, I would see how the people on the platform leading worship and whatever, who seemed so clean and spiritual on Sunday morning, they were trash Saturday night, stumbling out of bars and stuff like that. Like, I could see, I didn't understand it, but I could see it. And the world outside sees it too. So we need to begin from the realm of the gospel, preaching the truth and letting that truth seep in, but then also creating the structures necessary, the small decentralized structures necessary to practically live it out. I don't know if any of that made sense. That was so rambling. So I don't know. If it doesn't make sense, comment, and ask questions, and I'll see if I can try to clarify. But I guess if it was good, then like, share, subscribe. One update. So a few videos ago, I was talking about the possibility of debate with One Reality, with John Singleton, who are other YouTube channels out there. And that's still there. It's been kind of quiet simply because I've just gotten busy with all the holidays, Mother's Day, Memorial Day, Father's Day's coming up, being sick, and then we're finally going to finish this bathroom remodel that I'm in. There's just a lot of stuff going on, but it is going to happen. And in fact, what I'll probably do is I'll do a short kind of in brief rebuttal to a few of the points that they made, and I'll use that as kind of the jumping in point for setting the stage of what we'll discuss in that debate at that time when it should happen. So keep an eye out for that. It probably won't be the next video because I have a couple other things that I want to talk about that I want to just kind of get out there. In the meantime, like I said, like, share, subscribe, comment if you got questions, and I'll look forward to all that. I guess peace.